Hello, I'm Pat Collins. Welcome to Criminal Justice Matters. If you were asked just a decade ago what good security looked like, you might have mentioned a guard in the lobby or a night watchman. In today's much more complex world, images of security include such things as perimeters, passwords, access codes, surveillance cameras, and magnetometers. Or how about the NYPD's recent exploration of shutting down cell phone service to thwart a terrorist attack? Real risks and constant threats abound, and business preparedness is more essential than ever. In response to that need, John Jay College recently established a Center for Business Preparedness. Our guest on this edition is that center's director, Thomas Cavanagh. Tom is a former senior research associate at the Conference Board, an international authority on business practices and economic information. A visiting lecturer at Yale University, at Yale University in political science and director of the Center for the Study of American Government at Johns Hopkins University. Mr. Cavanagh has also authored numerous Conference Board reports in such areas as risk management and corporate security. Tom Cavanagh, welcome to the program. And to start out, why don't you tell us a bit about this Center for Business Preparedness here at John Jay?
Well, thanks, Pat. It's a brand new program. We're looking at the way corporate security officials deal with the public sector and also manage their own businesses internally.
What did corporate security mean? I mentioned at the top of the program, it used to be simply, gee, they have a guard in the lobby and you have to sign in. It's gotten a lot more complex, hasn't it?
Oh, it's way beyond that now. Right. There was a huge uptick in interest in the field, obviously, after 9/11. People realize that we're in a whole new era right now. So they have to take it much more seriously. They have to be much more systematic about the way they prepare for various eventualities. The big global companies have to worry about their supply chains because there are a lot of risks overseas. In many cases, they're worse than anything we're likely to see here in the U.S.
Have things changed forever? I mean, is the mentality changed? And I'm referring to here at John Jay College. I guess answering my own question, it has changed because I realized that before, say 4 or 5 years ago, anyone could walk in and out of these buildings. They were totally public buildings, and as I'm thinking about it, public buildings don't exist anymore in the sense that now everyone goes through a turnstile. Everyone shows an ID, even here at a public college.
Well, that's true in Manhattan, and it's true in Washington, D.C. It's true in downtown Chicago. I don't know if it's true throughout the U.S., though.
Is that a problem?
I'm not sure it is, because I think people are fairly realistic about the risks that they're facing. Obviously, Manhattan's in a kind of unique situation here, so you have to be very careful.
Do organizations care enough about the subjects you're interested in, though?
You mean the business companies?
Yes.
Or,
or take that either way. Government agencies, are they attentive enough, in your opinion?
Government agencies have gotten much better. It's not perfect by any means. There are people who do report cards on the various federal agencies, and they're finding that there are some surprising problems inside some of them. But I think there's been a lot of progress made since 9/11.
I want to come back to that issue, but part of your work, who is the audience for your center? Who are the primary, should I say, constituents for your organization?
I think there are two primary constituents. One is corporate security executives. We want to try to help them benchmark their activities, share learning among one another so that they understand what is best practice in the private sector right now, what is the state of the art, what should they be striving for. And the other major audience is the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. They're sponsoring our research and been very interested to find out what is going on in the private sector. A statistic you hear over and over again is that 85% of the critical infrastructure is in private hands. So companies have a big role to play here.
Give me an example of that when you say
well, electric utilities are one of the obvious infrastructure sectors.
Are those companies, now they have to worry about people they call ratepayers, and they can't just go charging up all kinds of security. Are they doing enough, in your opinion?
I think the electric utility industry is actually in pretty good shape. They have been for a long time. The nuclear utilities have been very heavily regulated since the 1960s. Right. In fact, the screening system that we use at airports was first developed for power plants that had nuclear reactors on site.
We are apparently going to have, if I'm reading things correctly, a resurgence in nuclear power in this country. I think in France they produce, I believe I read 85% of electricity produced there is produced nuclear. Here, I think it's, I'm really reaching here, but I think it's under 10.
I think it's more like 20%
is it 20?
in the U.S.
And but what I've read, and where I'm going with this, is that there is going to be an increase in nuclear generation. Being an expert on security and how companies are doing, how corporations are doing, how do you feel about that increase in nuclear?
In terms of security, I don't really worry about it that much. I think they're one of the safest sectors. A lot of people are concerned about it, but they are pretty much on top of their problems.
So 3 Mile Island lessons are really well learned.
They really are, yeah.
Your work talks about the conflict between 3 groups of people. It's pretty interesting. Cops, and I'm not calling names here, these are your terms, cops, geeks, and bean counters.
Yeah,
what is that about?
Okay, well the cops are the traditional security people, the guards at the gate, you might call them. You know, that's the security function we're familiar with for many, many years.
Of things,
yeah, exactly. The geeks are the people who do IT security, trying to keep your computer network safe. And the bean counters are the financial people, the CFOs, who are trying to figure out the cost of all of this. And run the risk management systems, which of course have gotten people into a lot of trouble in the last year or two in the financial sector. But one of the things our research found was that there's what we call the culture clash. Sure. That they come out of completely different cultures. The traditional security folks come out of a kind of command and control tradition. Police or military, and so they're used to having one mission, and you go out and you do it.
Right.
And the IT people are exactly the opposite.
No one goes in, no one goes out. Right.
Yeah, well, the IT folks tend to be kind of libertarian. They don't like being told what to do. So
I'm just going to ask you one time, because we have a very wide-ranging audience. I know what IT means.
Oh, information technology.
Okay, yeah. The geeks.
That's right.
Saying, yeah.
That's right. Yeah, we're nerds.
You said
I shouldn't. I know. I shouldn't be so pejorative, but those are the words they use themselves.
Yeah, but that's another area. They're interested in informational technology and security, and then finally the bean counters.
Yeah, risk managers. They basically don't want to spend any money than they feel they need to stay.
But that's their job.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
So there are conflicts. That's a good point, actually, because there are conflicts that are embedded in each of these positions, and they have to work their way out as you're trying to make policy inside a company.
Who's winning and who should win in that kind of a conflict?
Well, I don't think you can talk about it in terms of win or loss, because security is something that everybody benefits from. So the question is, how do you do it in the most cost-effective way?
We have, obviously, I can't talk about this issue without thinking of the terrible images of 9/11, but a lot of the threats we're talking about are not as visible, are they? Is that what makes them an issue of cost?
That's right. I think people are more aware of them, particularly in the IT sector now, because we're having all kinds of problems with hacking, with criminal gangs that are trying to get hold of passwords and steal or break into bank accounts or do fraudulent billing with credit cards. So this is something that everybody is potentially affected by.
But the risk is kind of imageless, I guess. Does it need a symbol? Does it need to become more visible for the danger to be apparent to corporations? Or are they aware?
Oh, I think they're aware, partly because there have been some laws passed recently that require that credit card holders be notified if their information has been stolen, or if you're in a health plan and somebody gets hold of your medical information. And I think that kind of transparency has been very helpful, because it makes people aware of the information being at risk, and so they're going to be more cautious, I think, as a result of that.
It is quite amazing. I have some, unfortunately, first-hand experience in this, because I got a call from American Express that someone was running around another city buying thousands of dollars worth of gasoline with my credit card, and they knew about it within a day. So so that kind of security that we don't even know about is really out there.
Well, the card companies are pretty good, actually. I had a similar experience, although I didn't lose anywhere. Of course, you don't lose the money, because they're good about covering the losses. But I had a call one day out of the blue from Chase, and somebody had got hold of my card information from always about 10 years earlier when I lived in Washington. And I think they were just testing it because they had gone to a flower shop and bought some bouquets, and they caught it immediately. I was very impressed by that.
I want to talk about how you think of safety in a few areas. We've had national problems and crises regarding salmonella poisoning, which gets me over to the food supply.
Yeah.
How is security, and is that an area of risk?
That is
And
potentially
terrorism.
an area of risk. We've seen a lot of problems with companies that are importing basic foodstuffs, particularly from overseas in places like China.
I mean, these outbreaks seem, to my limited scope of knowledge in this, they seem accidental, but it would also seem if someone wanted to do something deliberately, that would be a fertile ground to explore.
That's something that is of concern to people. I think you're right that most of the problems we've seen have been accidents. I mean, the companies that are in the food business don't want to get a reputation for poisoning their customers, so you know, they have an incentive to stay on top of this. But a lot of the companies that are running low-cost operations really are cutting corners, and you do have to be very careful about that.
We talked a little bit about the electric grid. They're in good shape in terms of security?
I think in terms of security, they're in good shape. There's some issues about the transmission system, whether it fits together in a sensible way. That's a separate issue. It's not really a security issue. But I think the security in that industry is generally pretty good.
And a final area I wanted to just mention, and I don't know whether it's fair to ask you to give the internet or companies that deal with it a grade, but maybe I will ask you, you're in a college now, if you could grade internet security, what would you grade it?
Well, it's tough to give an across-the-board grade on something like that.
Very good answer, Professor.
Well, you know, I just want to be precise about what I say, because some companies are very good about it. You know, they use secure sites. Some companies are pretty sloppy.
Sloppy what? To save money, or the knowledge hasn't caught up with them yet?
A little bit of both. It's a relatively new field, and it's still evolving, and so people are still feeling their way through it as to what's the best way to tighten up the security. There's a saying in the software field that you want security to be built in rather than bolted on. And what that means is that when you're writing software code, you want to be very security conscious when you're developing a program, rather than trying to clean it up afterwards, after you launch the program. That's much harder to do.
And are we getting away from that finally?
Well, I think we are getting to the point where a lot of security is getting built into these codes now, but that's relatively new. It's only really in the last 2 or 3 years that that's become common in the software industry.
We've been referring up to now to terrorism risks and the trade center, but one very interesting part of one of your reports was the effect of terrorism on small businesses.
Yeah.
And in particular, and something I had only read a small amount about, and that is the businesses around the trade center and how they were affected. How does that work? Or disaster preparedness, or is business preparedness, and I guess we're getting into the government role here, beginning to deal with the other consequences of disaster?
Well, it has to. We saw that also after Katrina in New Orleans, that trying to get the business community back on its feet was a very difficult thing to do. Right after 9/11, the people who were hurting the most actually were the small businesses. You had tens of thousands of people who were employed at dry cleaners and delis. And
there was no real mechanism to deal with
Not
that.
a good mechanism. FEMA had some support programs, and there were some state and federal programs. The difficulty was they weren't very well designed, because some of the FEMA programs, for example, they were essentially loan programs, and you had to pledge your personal property, including your house, as collateral. Well, a lot of these folks who own these businesses, their businesses have been wiped out, and now you've got their one remaining asset, and they have to put that at risk.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'll do it anyhow. What about insurance in that regard? Were insurance companies involved in helping out? Because it seems that could be an avenue to explore.
Well, the insurance for the businesses that had insurance, but one thing you have to remember is a lot of small businesses, they run very lean and tight, because they have to. You know, they're concerned about making payroll, and particularly when you get a collapse in demand, as you had in Lower Manhattan after 9/11, a lot of their customers aren't there anymore, so it's very tough to keep the business in operation. So a lot of these companies didn't have insurance, and that's a real problem.
Has that changed in the event of some other catastrophe? Are there mechanisms in place to help small businesses?
I think they're looking at putting more effective programs in there, but there's still a lot of red tape that has to get untangled. And again, this was a big problem in dealing with Katrina. We had a lot of conflicts about who was supposed to be taking the lead here. Was it the federal government, the state government, the municipal government? A lot of things fell through the cracks.
Was that because, though, it was a disaster that we had never seen the likes of before, or was it a flawed design of agencies up to that point?
Well, it was both. I think it was a flawed design, and I think the scale of the disaster revealed how flawed it was. And I think, you know, that's something that really needs to be looked at.
It's kind of hard to talk about a disaster in the hypothetical, but what you're saying is we're better prepared today than we were then.
Oh, I think so, yeah.
Government agencies, what is the current structure and what has it been in terms of getting the government involved in helping out with preparedness?
Well, the main federal agencies are the Department of Homeland Security, and basically it was stapled together in a period of about 2 years. They took about 40 separate agencies from a variety of departments. They had very different missions, and it's been tough to get it to work together.
What time span are we talking about here? I'm not a historian, but the Department of Homeland Security has existed about how long now?
I believe it was formed in 2003.
Right. So
it's still a relatively young agency.
And that was a group of agents, or how did that work?
Well, they picked up, it was about 40 separate agencies that had existed in other parts of the government, including some that might be a little surprising to you, like the Coast Guard, for example. Became part of DHS. FEMA had been around for a long time. There were a variety of agencies that were in the Commerce Department that dealt with infrastructure, and they were pulled in.
It sounds like, though, you'd have the same problem that you have in law enforcement, that get all these people in a room and they don't exactly all want to work together.
That's exactly right. Yeah, there are a lot of rivalries. Yeah.
Has that been dealt with at all?
Well, they're trying to deal with it, but it's tough to work your way through that.
How are they going to coordinate things? So is there a central figure now? Does it start at the top, or again, in the event of, is there a plan?
Yeah. I think it's, and we saw that actually with the hurricane that hit Houston. I think that was handled much better than the Katrina situation back in '05. I think that people learned a lot from the problems in dealing with Katrina.
How does your agency or your center reach out to organizations? How is that mechanism?
Well, there are three main ways. One is that we survey them, and we're going to be launching a survey this spring, follow up on some of the research that I had done previously when I was at the conference board. Secondly, we have networking events. We're doing a series of 6 workshops around the country. The first one will be here at John Jay at the end of February.
When is that? Do you have the dates nailed down yet? We can.
Well, it's invitation only, so I don't want to say too much about it. But we'll be doing 6 of these events.
How do you set that up? I'd imagine you're dealing with proprietary information with agencies and organizations that might be in competition, all of a sudden getting together in a room to talk about security and preparedness. And I know one rule in security, and I don't know if it's true of preparedness, is that in security, you don't talk about security. Right? I mean, that's the first rule.
Yeah.
We can't tell you that. We have it, but we're not going to talk about it. How do you get people who share that conflict together in a room and get something done?
Well, when they're dealing with one another, they're actually very open about sharing the information. What you need is a zone of trust, and I think the private sector people have that in dealing with one another. The big gap that you have to bridge is between the private sector and the public sector, because the private sector people are afraid if they speak too openly about their vulnerabilities that information will be used against them.
Can you give me an example, if you could, without spilling some beans that shouldn't be spilled?
Yeah, well, I'll try to give a very general example. If you're aware of a vulnerability in your building security, that's the kind of thing that you might want to share that information with somebody in another company to try to figure out what's the best way of dealing with it, or you might share it with a security consultant. But the difficulty you run into is if the information gets out into the public realm, then it could be used against you in a lawsuit if something happened. And in fact, a lot of the lawyers inside the company say that their corporate security people should not be very open in sharing this information. But that is something that detracts from security in general.
Right. Well, you know, the old thing of the public relations people say, tell everyone everything, and the lawyers get together and say, don't tell anyone anything.
Exactly, yeah,
conflict.
yeah.
And
the legal department's the Department of No. That's right. What it's often called.
How widespread is, well, I don't take it to a different area and ask you, with the federal agencies now, sure there were problems, Katrina brought them to light. We talked about downtown Manhattan and the problems there where agencies didn't function. You mentioned the Department of Homeland Security becoming this huge organization where everyone, I don't want to say got roped into it, was brought into it. I'm trying to avoid asking you for another grade, but how are we, so I won't, but how is that mechanism today?
I think it's steadily improving. Yeah. It got off to a rocky start. I think everybody accepts that, including DHS. One of the reasons they hired us to do some of the research when I was at the conference board was to figure out how to improve their functioning, because they realized they were having difficulty communicating with the private sector. But it's important for the nation's security to have this information shared and to try to work together. So I think they're aware of the problem, and I think they're gradually improving.
So you're satisfied that things are where they should be in the event of?
That's a hard question to answer. It depends what eventuality you're talking about, and some of these things we don't really know until they happen. But I think DHS and I think the country in general are much better prepared than they were a few years ago.
Let me ask you, in the research that you've done about preparedness, what surprised you? What was the biggest gap or problem?
I think the biggest surprise for me was that boards of directors are not very involved in these issues. I had assumed, at least at the larger companies, that they would be very involved, and we found that they're not. That by and large they seem to delegate it to the business continuity executives.
Why not? Don't they realize the cost of not just physical damage in terms of security, but the damage to a brand, the loss of intellectual property? Aren't they concerned about those things?
I think some of the companies are concerned about that, and there are a few industries where they take this very seriously, but there seems to be a tendency among the senior managements of companies and the board level people to say this is essentially an operational issue, that the board itself is supposed to be dealing with strategy. So they feel they ought to be delegating it down to a lower level. We were fascinated by that pattern. It was kind of surprising, actually. So we're doing some follow-up research this year to find out what's going on there.
We can't talk about most of the businesses and their preparedness without talking about the international scene. Are there things that are going better in other countries and things we can learn?
Actually, well, I would put it a little differently. I think more of the risk is overseas right now, and that's particularly true in the areas which have seen some military operations in recent years. Pakistan, I think, is seen as a totally failed state at this point. Afghanistan's in very bad shape. Excuse me.
And what do we do about that, if anything?
It's very difficult.
We've got our own house in order pretty much, or things are improving, because we want to protect our assets, but what about in those countries? Are American companies, for example, just pulling out of there?
No, they're not. They feel an obligation to stick it out and to try to protect their own people, protect their customers. I think the private sector has a hugely important role to play, actually, in that part of the world, because they loom very large in terms of the resources that they can bring to bear, because the governments in that area often don't function very well.
Are there some countries that some of your work mentions Israel, mentions Australia? Are there countries that are doing things we should be doing?
Yeah, well, Israel is seen as a country that is, for obvious reasons, very security conscious. I think a lot of people see El Al as being the gold standard for airline security, because they have to be, given the threats that they're facing. The British government, I think, is very much on top of the situation there, which, again, they have to be, because they've identified a lot of potential terrorist cells.
We have about 30 seconds remaining, and in that time, I'd like you to tell us again the name of your center and how it can be reached.
Okay, the Center for Business Preparedness. We don't have a website up quite yet. We're hoping to in a few weeks, but you can certainly reach us just by sending an email to me at John Jay. At
John Jay College. With that, Tom Cavanagh, thanks very much for being here. Thanks very much for watching. I'm Pat Collins, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.